Hi, everyone. So good afternoon or evening, wherever you are. Hope everyone is staying healthy and safe still. It's been a while. It's been a month or so since we've done one of these webinars. I'm John LaFranco, the Manager of Coaching Education and Development at Athletics Canada, and I'm also a university and club distance running coach. So before we get into the topic, I just want to set you up with a few housekeeping things. You're all muted. If you have questions, then you can write them in the questions dialog box on your screen. And the plan is that our panelist, who I will introduce shortly, is going to present. And then she and I will have a kind of a short Q&A with some prepared questions. And then we will get into your questions. My colleague Kyle Smith is behind the scenes, so he'll be fielding your questions and setting them up for us to discuss later on if we haven't answered them through the presentation and through the questions we prepared. So we'll do our best to get to all of them. The webinar is scheduled for an hour, and we want to stick to that because we know people plan, around the time that we said it was going to take. The webinar will be recorded and posted in the next couple of days on the AC website under the e-learning tab of the coaching section. And coaches who have entered their NCCP number will receive one professional development point for their participation in the webinar. So if you forgot that, you can email Kyle, coaching@athletics.ca, and let him know what your NCCP number is, and he'll check that you're here and set that up. So to start, we're trying something a bit new. We're going to use Menti. I don't know if anybody's used this before, so Kyle's going to throw up a little slide there. And what you can do is go to www.menti.com and type in the code 9513915 and answer the question. We're just starting it just to kind of try it out. Really easy question. What province are you located? So you guys can go and do that, and then we'll kind of get a sense of who's who. Numbers should be appearing live on the screen as you come out. There we go. Ontario out to an early lead as expected. Got some others in there. It's meaning of the screen to see a little small on my end. Alberta, Nova Scotia. Ooh, Ontario. Make sure you hit submit. Sometimes you just kind of type it in and then wait, and nothing happens. So make sure you hit submit. More for Ontario. Big time Ontario. I know that's because Saeed shared this with us at the what do we call the roundtable or open house or town hall. Town hall, that's what they call it. So then we got a lot of Ontario people. Okay. Good. I know that. So that's like we're at almost 20. We've got about 27 people on. So a few more. Although I don't think that anyone's going to catch up to Ontario at this point. Oh, Newfoundland. There we go. And BC. All right. Well, it's very Ontario heavy. That's fine though. Okay, so the topic of this webinar is the responsible coaching movement and the rule of two. So Athletics Canada has signed the pledge for the responsible coaching movement, and what does that mean? It means a few things, and Isabelle, our panelist, is going to explain that for us. And one of the primary elements of the responsible coaching movement is the rule of two, and this is something that is very top of mind for coaches. Because it's specifically about coaching. So the goal of the rule of two is to ensure that all interactions and communications between coaches and athletes are open, observable, and justifiable. So the purpose is to protect participants, especially minors and coaches, in potentially vulnerable situations by ensuring more than one adult is present. That's the rule of two adults. And there may be exceptions in emergency situations. So I think that's what we're gonna kind of talk about how that actually plays out in real life. So to help us understand this in a more deep way, I'm happy to introduce Isabelle Cayer, who is the Director of Sports Safety with the Coaches Association of Canada. Isabelle, in her role, provides leadership and expertise in the areas of safe sport, chartered professional coaching, and the responsible coaching movement. And she's also responsible for helping the CAC identify and deliver safe sport training, policies, processes to sport organizations so as to build a safe sport environment for participants, coaches, and parents across Canada. So she really is the person to ask about this topic. So thank you for joining us, Isabelle. How do you want to throw up Isabelle's slide deck and she can start her presentation?
Thanks a lot, John. Thanks everyone for being here today. It's a really important topic, and I'm happy to be able to give you a bit of an update and really focus in on the rule of two. So hopefully we can answer all of your questions, and it's an important conversation, and we're really in this changing landscape right now within sport in Canada. So there's been a lot of good work that's been done already. I'm going to highlight a few things just to get going, and then we'll really dive into rule of two and get to some of your questions. But you know, part of my philosophy is really to co-collaborate on a lot of the work we're doing around safe sport. It's really changing how we operate as coaches, as clubs, as organizations, and there's a lot more emphasis on safe sport, not only in the context of abuse, harassment, discrimination-free environments in which we participate in sport and experience sport, but also just generally around other things like concussion, pandemics, and other things. So there's a lot going on right now. So we really want to support. We want to hear your voice and try to work together and just make people feel comfortable, and that we're not living in fear-based environments. We really have an opportunity to rebuild trust in the sport community and as a sector, and just provide a place of belonging and inclusion for our participants. So yeah, so I'll just get started then. I guess, Kyle, if you want to advance the slide. All right, so I thought we'd just start with a question about what safe sport means to you. I think there's a poll on that, right, Kyle?
Yeah, we're gonna get a Menti up again, so that it'll be the same thing. So I'll just reload it there, and I think there was a question with the code. The code is the number up at the top there, 9513915. You just type that in, and whatever it means to you. There you go. Respect. Inclusive. Writing. So this is a word cloud. I don't know if you guys have seen this before, but it's sort of meant to represent, the words are bigger, it means they're being said more, that kind of thing. Having protections, and their respect and protection are staying big. Inclusivity, trust, safe, pride, no bullying, trusting, duty of care, fun, healthy, positive, success, lots of things. This is great. This is it's a good word cloud. Everything in there, I think, is all connected to safe.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, all right, so yeah, go ahead and talk through it. Maybe Kyle, leave it up for a bit, and then we can jump back to the slides. There it is. All right.
Okay, yeah, so just quickly, I'll do a bit of a background. We'll talk just high level of responsible coaching movement and get into the rule of two and then Q&A. So those are really the main things. And I did add a few extra slides regarding education and resources and a bit around the new safe sport training at the end. So that's just available for your information, or if we have time, we can go through that quickly as well. Okay, we can go to the next slide. All right. So just a quick background on the safe sport movement, particularly from our role in this at the CAC. And we just, so back in 2015, we hosted a summit around sexual abuse in sport. And so we partnered with Scouts Canada, Respect Group. We had Sheldon Kennedy as a guest speaker and talking about some of his experiences and work that he's done as a result of that, and who is an NHL player, for those of you that might not know. And from that, the system really was looking for someone to lead around responsible coaching movement. So that's what it sort of morphed into. And so that was launched in 2016. And it's really a voluntary program. It's meant to create a framework for sport organizations to just look at their policies, look at their hiring practices, and create opportunities for hiring coaches and providing training to not only coaches, but even volunteers and athletes and other members within the sport. So that was created, and since 2016, we've had over 740 organizations sign up to take the pledge. So a bulk of those are clubs, and then we have our national sport organizations and other organizations and provincial and territorial sport organizations. So Athletics Canada signed up, and there have been 7 provincial sport organizations within athletics, as well as 7 clubs that have also signed up. So it's great to see, especially being a voluntary, sentiment and pledge to take. So that's been really nice to see. As in addition to that, we continued some work with the federal government, and in particular Minister of Sport, Minister Kirsty Duncan, really focused in on safe sport and understanding what, having conversations with organizations and trying to understand what the landscape looked like and what supports were needed. So that really led to some national safe sport summits that occurred last year, and then as a result of that, some additional work. So yeah, so go ahead, Kyle, we can go to the next slide. So in terms of the responsible coaching movement, as I mentioned, just in terms of it being voluntary, it really focused in on these 3 key areas. So the rule of 2, the screening, so not only like criminal record checks, but also a piece around duty of care and due diligence for checking in with previous employers, or if coaches were floating from different provinces, and also just around the training piece. So there's a number of training events that are accessible for coaches and sport organizations as well. So this is really what, just as a reminder that these are really the components of responsible coaching movement. And in sort of the phase 2, this is phase 1, providing additional policies. So things like social media policies, travel policies, really other tools to educate sport organizations and even parents. So additional tools for parents and just some ongoing work to support organizations as you move to taking the pledge to implementing it, and what that looks like and how we need to continue the conversations, which is exactly what's happening today. So it's awesome that Athletics Canada is doing this. So we can move forward to the next slide. So I wanted to point out a piece around vicarious liability, and this is something that came up from that original summit, which was if we take Scouts Canada as the example, where you've got a national organization that's hosting programming across Canada, and then you have sort of like local branches, local organizations that represent the organization that carry out some of the work. And so one of the things that came up is just liability of boards or directors on boards, or a national organization being like even a third party to people that represent that organization and being liable for and responsible for their behaviors. So it's just it's not something I want to get into, but it's just at a very high level that you could be a few removed from the national sport or the provincial sport and still be liable for the behaviors of someone representing your sport. So it's just a key piece around the why it's important to have policies or rules or guidelines, which I know there's differences, but to help guide the work that's happening that represents sport in Canada. I just wanted to just quickly touch on that. Okay, we can move forward, Kyle. And then, unfortunately, there's all the, the media and the stories that really bring attention to what's happening in sport. So we don't always hear the good stories and the 99% of coaches that are doing great work and have great healthy relationships with their athletes and their sport organizations and are really developing good human beings and have a holistic approach. So it's when these types of stories surface, and it is important, like we need to bring attention to it. There's no question about it. But it causes distress in the system for those that are not representative of this type of behavior. And so what happens is it creates fear and it creates a lack of trust in the system. And then there needs to be a response for organizations. So when this happened, we already had the responsible coaching movement in place, but it really led to some really immediate actions coming from Sport Canada, federal government, Minister of Sport. And so I just want to flip to the next slide and show sort of where we are now. And so I mentioned we did national Safe Sports Summits across Canada in every province and territory last year. And there was also some other safe sport working groups and ethics working groups from the federal government level representing all levels of sport, which led to these really important pieces. I just want to highlight those in terms of collaboration on a universal code of conduct. So that was actually released in December of 2019. And I think maybe another version in early 2020. And so what's happening is that all Sport Canada funded organizations must adopt aspects of this universal code of conduct. So alignment of the definitions of maltreatment in sport. So psychological, physical, sexual. And so that will be universal across all organizations in their code of conducts or policies that they have in place. And in addition to that, support with a training program for participants that have, whether you're an athlete, whether you work directly with athletes, so as a coach or an official, and if you are a decision maker or you indirectly responsible for work with athletes. So the training, there's Respect in Sport is training that's been approved by Sport Canada. And we were fortunate to be designated as a body to create training that is free, that aligns with the code and the definitions in the code, and provides some scenarios and some videos and other examples of how this can show up. So that training was launched in April and is available for free through our website and through our Locker, which is our platform for hosting e-learning. So that's been made available, and all sports will have to comply with getting a code in place by April 1, 2021. And then there's also been funding that's been dedicated to implementing safe sport initiatives, whether it's policies, whether it's training. And it's not just for the code, but also for organizations. So whether it's called like your positive workplace policy or respect in sport policy, respect in the workplace, but really just to support revising, bringing your policies up to date with your provincial policies as well, like your occupational health and safety. So there's a couple of other elements that need to align in terms of your own province. And then the next sort of piece is around the independent body. So having an independent third party body where you can report into or can lead investigations. So some sports already have that in place, including athletics, and it's really meant to create some neutrality in reporting, and really to try to protect the athletes, if it's an athlete reporting, if it's for coaches. So trying to create consistency in the system around the process by which you can complain, report, and investigate anything that comes forward. So I think this will really strengthen our system and really help people understand the avenues that are available to them, and try to minimize some of the fear and create hopefully a safe way that will be investigated and provide a fair process for everyone involved. And then some of the other aspects around the code were related to, age and power imbalances and positions of authority. So really trying to protect, just relationships that may or may not have been deemed inappropriate in the past, but now is really defined in the code as well. And then the implementation is really that next phase that's happening over the course of the next year or two. So just want to give a high level what's happening and how it impacts definitely Athletics Canada and the CAC and other national organizations, and that will likely trickle down to provincial and club over time as well. Okay, we can move on to the next. I don't know if we want to pause here for any questions, but otherwise we will move into why we're really here today, which is to talk about Rule of Two. I don't know if you want to let me know, Kyle or John.
I don't have any questions. I don't think that right here. Like there's yeah. So far so good. So let's move to Rule
Okay. Okay, great. All right, we'll move.
People have questions about that previous part. Ask them. We'll get to them.
Yeah, and at any point, if you have a question, please don't hesitate to put it in the chat, or I'm not sure if you can just speak up as well, but happy to pause at any time. All right, so the definition, so John provided the definition, but it's essentially just to create open and accountable and transparent modes of communication. So whether that's happening in person or it's happening through some sort of online environment program. So whether you use TeamSnap or whatever the mode of communication is within your club is sort of driving how you communicate with your athletes, with other coaches, with other members of the club and volunteers and the board. And so it's really to minimize risk for minors and protect coaches, protect athletes, and protect volunteers as well. So I know the infographic was included in this presentation, so you can also click on it because this one's a little bit small. But I just wanted to speak to it a little bit where it's really evolved from when we first launched it to today. So originally we had what we had called a gold standard, which was 2 NCCP certified coaches and 1 athlete. So the rule 2 being, you have 2 adults present with an athlete, and the gold standard was really like 2 certified coaches, but we've changed that over time because our the feedback that we've been getting from the sports system at large is really that it's just very difficult for that to have to achieve that standard. So the general concept of Rule of 2 is that you have 3 people. Okay, so you have, if it's 1 coach and you have 2 athletes, or you have 2 coaches, or 1 parent and 1 athlete, or 1 volunteer, or someone else. So it's really just to protect everyone, that there's at least 3 people when you're coaching, when you're you're training, where in athletics you could be in a very open and transparent environment, or sometimes there has been one-on-one coaching. So it's the different sports have different scenarios, but really there's also like the transportation to events or to training, and sometimes there can be limited participation if that transportation is not in place. So it's really just about what your clubs or what your affiliated organizations are putting in place regarding Rule of 2. So this is like a general definition, and it's meant to just define that, to try to avoid as much as possible a one-on-one scenario with an athlete and a coach. Okay, we can move forward. So again, just as I mentioned, that your coach is not alone or at a site with a participant, and if you need to have a private conversation, there's ways you can do that, whether you're on the field and you're just back turned to other participants. So especially if somebody's upset, or you're in a room that has a window, but it's still there's just different ways that you can communicate with your sport, that they're aware that you need to have these conversations, or they are happening, or you need someone that's trusted for the athlete or the coach to be present as well. So this is really, the piece around the electronic messaging we'll get into a little bit more, but this is an area that's, with social media, with texting, with a lot of different platforms available, and the modes of communication of our younger participants as well, is an area that we've really had to augment. So that's the piece that I can focus a little bit more on today, because that was in response to COVID and the pandemic as well, that we had to create a framework for sports to be able to provide to their participants as well. So we can move on, we can move forward with that. Okay, so this is where we've added in around the virtual setting. So really is applicable to minor athletes and those that are under the age of 16 or as defined by the province, because there is some variances across different provinces. It could be 18, it could be 19 as well. And because of the virtual environment, because of our conditions right now with mental health issues, being isolated, just everyone's kind of in a different place, and we're not always aware of what that is and what their experiences are, what their environment is. So it's actually a recommendation that it could even apply to non-minor athletes, just given everything that's happening right now. And then just two adults being present, or volunteer or parent, for everyone's protection. We can move on to the next slide. There's quite a few slides here, sorry, because there's a lot of different considerations. Also, just really maintaining professional standards. So the way that you conduct yourself in a professional, like as a coach in your actual environment, to try to keep that the same in sessions that are designated as training sessions. Like if you're doing like an off-ice conditioning session, or an off the field conditioning session. Sorry, I come from skating, so everything's off ice, but just those engagements are still professional and in the online environment. And if the sessions are happening always regularly at the same time every day or every week, that the parents and guardians are signing off on that, are aware of that. Obviously the organization would be aware of it. And in some cases, your insurance, if you do have insurance that's either with your national sport or with your province, or even your own insurance, that they might have some additional requirements that you would need to fulfill to be covered for insurance for the purposes of moving to an online setting, like something that's outside of your normal activity. So these are just some of the considerations. And then, so if it was like a regular session, if it was like an 8-week program, every week, every day, scheduled at the same time, then there could be just one sign off. Everybody knows that when it's happening. If it's irregular, then you'd be getting consent on a regular basis that is happening, and people are aware of it. Okay, we can flip to the next one. And, again, just keeping a professional environment or background if possible. So avoiding, the coach or the leader of the session being in their room, as well as the athlete that's participating, that they're in a room that's open. So an open area, living room, backyard, something that's, also considering the environment there. And then where possible, if you're recording your sessions. And that could be like if you're online, but also if you're having phone calls with others, or if you're writing some sort of summary of what the conversation was, or if you're giving feedback to athletes that you want to back up and send back to the organization. So those are just some examples of that. Okay, we can move on to the next slide, thanks. So again, just prohibiting these one-on-one texting, emails, online contact. And, it's not to make your lives more difficult. It's really just to try to protect you and keep everybody safe, and just not leave things to interpretation. Sometimes in text, it can easily be misinterpreted. And there's no, like, the way we communicate is really through body language, verbal cues, and we really miss that when we're, texting or emailing or other forms that don't have that sort of personal interaction and engagement, or a way to clarify if there's a misunderstanding. And then around the social media piece is really just, trying to avoid, it's difficult if you are on social media and then you have athletes following you. So then it's just, it's a little bit more difficult, but really, as a role model, just, the types of things you're posting, or if they're following you or they want you to follow them, or you're engaging in, Facebook or other things. So just really trying to limit that. Or if the sport organization deems like certain platforms acceptable, then there's maybe some sort of sign off on how, protecting the brand, protecting that organization, protecting you as a representative in terms of what they would expect from you in how you're communicating through social media. So that's something that, it's not something that we dictate. It's just the things to consider in those practices that you'd want to have, and really looking to, we realize that, we're adding a lot to coaches. Like we've been running these safe sports summits just recently and giving coaches a voice. And what we're hearing is that coaches are really managing up to their organizations. So really, trying to lead the way for the organization, that these are things that should be in place. So in our policy work that we want to do and collaborate with, our partners on, is really about, the org taking the lead to, and determining in collaboration with athletes and coaches, what is the best platform, what is the best mode of communication that everyone can agree to, because you also don't want to leave somebody out. Like if somebody's not on Facebook and you're using that, then they're out of the loop of communication as well. So just trying to find those ways to create policies that work for everybody, and that people understand them, and that you can actually implement them or put them into practice.
So I want to jump in, because this is where we're getting a few questions, and this is definitely something that we wanted to talk about. So in the idea is I'm gonna play the role of the disgruntled coach, and like, why are you making my life hard? So if what if an athlete texts me? Can I not just text that person back? How does that work? If I just get a text from an athlete, hey coach, what am I supposed to do today? Or hey coach, my niece, or should I run or not? Or just anything, or something maybe more personal, like coach, I had a fight with my significant other, or something like this, and I don't feel like coming today, or I just failed this exam. Like, I have to copy their parents on that now, and then they're gonna be like, why didn't you tell my parents I failed the exam? And so I'm just trying to throw out like real life situations here. How do we get around that, or not get around, but how do we deal with it?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think it comes back to just teaching athletes about a new way of communicating. And so, like, if that hasn't happened, like if the conversation hasn't happened where it's like, look, I just want to set some boundaries around the way we communicate. And so if it is something that's needed as a shift, where that is the mode of communication right now, that athletes were just always texting their coaches about different things, it's just around changing a bit of the way forward and the culture around communication. But certainly, if that hasn't happened and you're kind of faced with it, I think it's probably, it could be a case where you say, look, I want to respond to this, but just to let you know, I need to copy in somebody else. And if you're not comfortable, then we need to move this to a different format. And it really is the conversation.
Is it different at different ages? Like if I'm talking about a 15 or 16-year-old kid versus like a 29-year-old sort of national team athlete, is it a different response?
Well, I mean, you're dealing with an athlete, but you're still dealing with the power imbalance, and there's still the different, there's different position of trust. And so even though they are adults, I think that in the case where they're being evaluated, they're being selected for teams or not, it's probably best to have like somebody from, if it's at the national level, that somebody from the NSO is copied in on that, or there's a record of it somehow. So there's some different tools now that can be used. So yeah, it's just really kind of changing our communication styles, and trying to create those boundaries. I know that the athlete coach relationship is very, it's unique, and it can be very, like, I don't want to use the word close, like it's just like not a really good word to use, but there's those bonds between athletes and coaches that
Yeah.
are really important to the success of them as a team and their performance. But I guess it's really about having those conversations around boundaries and what's going to be okay moving forward and what's not going to be okay. And it's, you know, it's really a time, right, for that conversation to happen, and to just create comfort in finding the right person to be involved in, um, different types of conversations that are happening, someone that they're comfortable with. Maybe it's the team doctor or another member of medical staff. If it is something more personal nature that's related to injury or something else. But if they're having problems at home, like, yes, we want coaches to be able to support their athletes, and we've done some research around like the role of the coach in more sensitive topic areas, and definitely like the athlete in some cases say that they do talk to their coaches, in other cases they don't. But there's also that both the athlete and coach feel that they can play a supportive role. So it's really just about how that gets managed now in this kind of shifting landscape here. I'm not sure if I answered your question totally, but
Well, I think we should keep going with some of the questions that are coming in, because I think that they help to sort of push the conversation forward. So someone had asked, Samantha had asked, and this was on my questions to ask, do you recommend using TeamSnap or like a third party kind of app where there's kind of an administrator, or there's like the messages are, there's sort of someone who can see those messages, like maybe they're not receiving them or whatever, but there's another person who has access to the messages. Would that sort of fulfill the requirement in the sense that it's a conversation that is then open, because you're not going to say anything in the conversation that presumably you don't want someone else to see, because someone else can see it, even if they aren't necessarily following along like in live? Would that kind of work?
yeah, like you could probably even create like a club alias where there's an email that it just automatically loops into the club, like, so it just drops into a folder of some sort where it's recorded, right? So it's there. It's not like somebody is maybe is not, they're not necessarily receiving it and like they're able to read it, but that it's there, and it's just on record, and it's not, doesn't add work per se to either of the parties that are involved in the conversation, but it is then a record, right, that you can access.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that. Yeah, because then it's really like, if we think about what the goal is, the goal is not to include more voices in the conversation. The goal is to make sure the conversation is open, so that both people can feel comfortable that I guess they're not going to be put in a vulnerable situation as a result of the conversation. So that that seems to me like it would be good. Another question just on this kind of like online discussion, and I think in distance running in particular, track and field's an individual sport. It's not, yes, we have teams, but a lot of the time the coach athlete relationship is really like one to one, and then to the other to the other. And we have, I think, a significant adult recreational population and coaches who are coaching these adult recreational athletes. So the coach athlete power imbalance is still there, but the stakes are a bit different from what you had mentioned. And I wonder, if you thought that this was something, again, that would be necessary and needed. And I mean, I think, yeah, well, I'll just leave it at that. I had another thing to say on that, but I'll let you kind of answer, like, specifically about adult recreational athletes who need to follow the same protocols.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the original basis of the rule of two was really about minor athletes. It wasn't as much about adults that are participating in sport. So I think that, again, like, it would be something that would be back to the clubs to determine exactly how they would want to manage those types of activities that are happening. Because I mean, yes, it's still a coach athlete relationship, but you're dealing with two adults, and there could be other ways, right, that you could protect, like the club could have a procedure in place where it's a matter of knowing that, you know, the coach and the athlete are going to be training from this time to this time together. So it's kind of like, you know, you're checking in when you go out and you're checking in when you come back in. And so it keeps a record that this has occurred. I mean, I'm not, again, it's just trying to just, you know, create an environment of safety for all participants. So, you know, if you factor in vulnerable populations, that might not be applicable. So if you have a blind athlete as an example that that will be running, so that would be considered a vulnerable person. So then that may not be applicable. Like you might want to have an additional person there. So it's really, you know, it's you know, our role is to try to provide some framework or you know, prompts in terms of what are the things that are really important to consider when you are liable for, you know, you're providing these activities, you're providing these environments, and what is the best sort of way to set this up so that everybody feels safe and you've done your due diligence, right?
Yeah. So I guess just to sort of follow up, hopefully, there's lots of other things we can talk about here, but how does this connect to privacy and in a sense, like privacy is probably kind of the legalistic way of looking at it, but just the sense of trust as well. Like, because I think that the truth is, like, you know, there aren't really any training secrets, and it's kind of fine if there's, like, you know, another coach in the club that's sort of seeing what, oh, like this is what we're planning to do. Like, I don't really think that is a particular issue. But just in the general sense of privacy and people's communications, you know, they might not have a reasonable expectation that, you know, other people aren't looking at them. So what would you say to that end?
Yeah, well, I guess some of the privacy is, I guess it would depend on what it was. Like if it's something that's quite serious, that like there's an element in the code that's around duty to report. So that would be there's a specific age, and it depends on the province and what it is. So in some cases, there is that duty to report that supersedes privacy. You know, in those cases of abuse, that you know that might be something that, you know, the coach is put in that position where it's been shared to them. But when you, like, in terms of privacy, like from, I guess what you also mean is just like, you know, I'm the athlete, I want to talk to my coach privately because I have a matter that I want to deal with. And I think that's back to sort of changing that if that was like the common practice, changing that to be, look, you know, you can still come to me, but we need to bring in either like an assistant coach or somebody else that's part of the team. So, you know, it could be just a collaboration on who they would feel comfortable with. And I also think it's like, it's a really good opportunity for a number of things. Like, I think it's like finding another trusted colleague and someone that actually, it's an opportunity like for even peer-to-peer coaching, or someone that can give you feedback on your communication too. Because, you know, you have like in your mind, if you know the athlete or you know the situation, like you might have that certain rapport, and like we get back to like some of the interpretations of communication. But if you've got someone else there that maybe doesn't have the same rapport or know everything as well, they might be able to give some feedback. Hey, what did you mean by that? Or this is how I interpret it. So it just kind of gives an opportunity to kind of strengthen those communication skills and just provide other opportunities to engage with others. So it's a bit of a spin on, you know, the actual privacy thing, but I think there's a real opportunity to get there that you know, to create additional relationships with others.
Cool.
I mean, I'd love to hear what others think too. Like if there's time, like I know we have about 15 minutes, but I'm sure like we've been hearing a lot from coaches about what they've been doing and how they've been, you know, kind of implementing Rule of Two and documenting things. So it seems to be like a lot of coaches have taken it on, and if anyone wants to share what they've been doing, you know, that would be great, because I think we're all here to invite some dialogue.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think if people have you know, things they want to share, solutions and stuff, write them in, and we'll definitely you know, focus on that. I think that I don't know if you want to kind of go on with how many more slides you have.
I think I only have a few slides.
Okay. Just so we can, you know, make sure that you sort of covered stuff, and maybe that'll help answer a couple questions. But I do have a few follow-ups that, you know, to kind of like the sort of the bigger picture of things, and in response to some questions that are coming up. So you just kind of go through what you've got, and then we'll start chatting again.
Yeah, I think this was the last slide. It was just around, oh yeah, just so back in the virtual environment, just I guess just was another suggestion around like security settings and passwords and whatnot. And then that was just another, like we have partnered with the Canadian Center for Child Protection, and they have also created a lot of resources related to, well, COVID, but really moving to a virtual setting for, like, as an example, like teachers, you know, teaching their students. So they've created some great resources that are all free, and they're actually even available by hard copy if people preferred to have hard copy materials, especially in northern communities. And then there's other resources around Kids Help Phone too. So it's Kids Help Phone. They actually created a text service where you can text in, or you can video in, or call in to a chat, but they opened it up for adults as well. So it's not just kids now, it's for adults, because of COVID and isolation, and just, you know, if you're living on your own, you need to talk to someone. So they've created that. There's just a different piece that to add on to, you know, just people experiencing not having those you know, being in a live environment anymore. So just creating opportunities to be able to reach out to somebody. I think that was it for mine, and it was my next slide, I think, was just open for questions.
Okay, cool. So I think what I wanted to get at, so there was a kind of a question or sort of follow up that I'll just read it out because I think it's well put. Shouldn't the focus be on training coaches and fostering sport cultures that allow people to speak up if they are uncomfortable with something and have a complaint dealt with, rather than swept under the carpet, rather than imposing something like a rule of two? The sweeping of complaints under the rug is a serious problem that undermines efforts to create and foster a safe environment. So I actually wanted to answer it, or sort of follow up with that, because it's something that I've thought a lot about in terms of, you know, why are we doing this? Like, I'm a good coach. What, you know, like, I can probably, like, I can get away with talking to an athlete one-on-one because it's going to be fine. But actually, the rule of two does exactly what this person is asking for. Because if the 99% of good coaches that are out there that are trying to do right by their athletes and not, you know, nowhere near, you know, any kind of abuse or harassment or anything like that, if we all act in a certain way, in a way that protects us and is safe and that makes the athletes feel safe, then it will make it much more difficult for the bad actors to sort of do their thing, because the norm will be, you know, rule of two. So having the rule of two, in fact, does foster a sport culture and allow people to speak up, because we've been educated. We know about the rule of two. We're supposed to be trying to do the rule of two. So if we see somebody not, that empowers us to say, you know, not necessarily like go file a complaint right away, but to say to that coach, hey, you know what? It's probably better if you don't, you know, like go into the locker room alone with the athlete and have that conversation. It's better to have it on the track, if you know, just where we can see you, kind of thing. So I do think that this does address that issue. And that's kind of a real, that's the big message for me, is that we're not trying to punish good coaches with this. We're trying to create, you know, we're trying to model good behavior so that bad behavior is easy to see. Would you say that that is, you know, what the RCM and Rule of Two is trying to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's, you know, it's, I mean, coaches make a difference, right, in the lives of athletes. They develop people, and everything can go along and, you know, exist that way, but it's when something bad happens that unfortunately, like that gets most of the attention, right? So it's like we're really in this new landscape where yelling at kids and as a form of motivation is no longer really acceptable. And so it's just an example from a perspective that we've normalized things in sport that in another sector would just not be acceptable. It just wouldn't fly. So sport is a little bit behind the times, but I think all of these things that we're trying to put in place are really to create and have sport synonymous with safe. Like if I show up for sport, it should be safe. So it's going to be safe because of all these things that we're putting in place. And it's, to be honest, the onus is really on the sport organizations to create those policies and processes. And then, and that's what we're here to do, is to support that, so that we don't have to, that sports and coaches, like whoever's leading, is not left on their own to figure all this stuff out like that, to create those frameworks where you can just kind of adopt it and modify it to fit your environment properly. But that's really what the goal is to really, because we want to protect sport, and we want it to be a good experience for everybody. And sometimes it's not a safe experience for coaches. So it's not, the target is not coaches. It's that we want the people coming in to have a good experience, a positive experience, and that they feel safe. And that's the physical environment, that's the interactions with the people there, that's the feeling like they belong there, that it's inclusive, right? So it's a number of factors that, even though we're saying like safe sport is sport free of abuse, harassment, and discrimination, what we mean is that sport is good, sport there's a lot of benefits to sport, right? So it's all part of that, like, and this is just one of those pieces. So yeah.
I think that one of the benefits of sport is that coach-athlete relationship. I think that there are many examples of athletes who have a strong relationship with their coach, a strong positive relationship that allows them to overcome things, allows them to grow. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that is allowed to continue in a positive way. So I have a few more questions that are kind of sort of specific, sort of scenario type questions, and I think they're good ones because it really, well, hopefully it'll give us some good feedback on how to deal with this. So if an athlete initiates an idea for like a one-on-one meeting, like if an athlete says, I need to talk to you, like just you, because it's like a sensitive topic, and say it's, they want to talk about, an eating disorder or something like that, something that's sensitive, and they want to, essentially disclose a thing, and they've chosen the coach to talk to. How, can we kind of accommodate this, because the athlete is basically saying, like, I don't really want to talk to other people about this
now. Yeah, I think you can do that in an open environment where, whether it's in a meeting space where there's a window, like there's people know that you're in there talking, but they don't necessarily hear what you're saying. So that would provide an environment where it's private, but people can see what's going on. And then the coaches can record, like not necessarily like record it so that the audio, but they can kind of take some notes, and that's really encouraged, right? So you can put the date, what you talked about, what was the result of the meeting, and that you just have that, in your records. And it came up today on our call too, where it's really about like even teaching up and coming coaches to keep a record of their communications and evaluations, or just that you have things on file. So if something really does blow up, you have some backup for.
Now, I wanted to follow up on the open and observable, like, so maybe that's not a conversation the athlete wants to have in the middle of the field. Is it okay to go to a coffee shop, which is a public place? There are other humans there. They might not know that you're a coach athlete pair. Would that make it okay because it's kind of in public? With the habits of recording and things like that, too, like writing things down. But is that also open and observable, meeting an athlete in a coffee shop type setting where there's other people, but not the sport people necessarily?
Yeah, well, that's I think it's a bit trickier because it depends on the age of the athlete, first of all, and then yes, it's open and observable, like you're in a public space, but you're outside of your setting, right? And that's one of the things that's in here too, is around like you're no longer in your environment, your sport environment, you're outside of that. So again, that would be something that probably would or should be included in the club's policies around it, because
So
you
you
could
don't want to
still
meet
record
outside
it.
the environment, is what you're saying.
I wouldn't really recommend it. Like it again, like it's not I'm not like the person that's sort of telling you all what to do, but
Yes.
I'm just trying to look at it from the perspective that these are the really the conversations that, like, this is a great question and one that should be had within the club in terms of like what are the expectations of the behaviors that we want to see, or what's okay, what's not okay, what's above the line, what's below the line, like something simple where if that was I am a president of a local club, and that would be something that I would say probably to avoid doing.
Sure. Yeah, like if it's a skate club, like you can kind of sit in the arena in the stands while a practice is going on or something, and then it's there. So yeah.
And it is traditionally a sport that parents are more involved because it's an expensive sport, and there's a lot of time that goes, every sport, there's a lot of time that goes into it, and but it's very much like there's a lot more personal coaching. So but you're on the ice with a whole bunch of other people, and there are definitely times where you always want to be keeping the parent in the loop on progress, because if you're not competing often, then the reporting has to come from the coach giving progress updates too.
Yeah, I mean, track and field can kind of be, it depends, but the opposite, but there's very little parental involvement. So that could be an additional challenge that people might have to think about. I'm not sure if there's a rule of two exactly, but maybe more on the kind of like child protection side of things. Like what if like an athlete is initiating physical contact, like a hug or something like this? Like how do you, I don't know if this is within our discussion, but like, athlete finishes the race, they come over and they give you a big hug and you're like, oh no. But I mean, the emotion is real and the connection is real. Like people hug, it's fine. But how do you kind of see that in terms of this responsible coaching movement?
Yeah, that's another. It's a good question. It's another tricky one. Like I think I don't know if you followed some of them. There was one particular gymnastics situation in the news where that was one of the reported behaviors around, like the coach hugging the athletes and then the coach kissing the athletes, and the coach's wife was also a member of the club, so it was almost like it was just a normal behavior that wasn't to a particular athlete. But you have to think also about the interpretation when you're on the other side of the window, when you're looking in saying, hey, that's weird, or so it has, like, again, like I would say, I mean, if they initiate it and it's unexpected, I mean, it's happened, and you can always document that, but I would that would be another conversation to have with your athletes in terms of boundaries and what's expected or not.
So I mean, you mentioned the safe sport training. I think that we will. I don't know if it's in our resources there, but it's definitely on our website, or if it's not, I'll put it up there. The Respect in Sport and the Canadian Center for Child Protection has an e-learning program as well. And something I remember from that was that if the athlete comes to you and initiates a hug or something like that, like that's okay because they are initiating it and you are kind of receiving it. But as an adult, it's not up to you to put your emotions on the kid and be like, you know what, I need a hug today. You should not be asking for hugs. But if, again, and it's sort of a normal sort of, like after a race or something, like if the athlete does that, then it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it shouldn't be something that the coach is kind of out there looking for it and kind of initiating this kind of physical, relationship. So that's the kind of the differentiation that the CCCB put out there was like, it's not, you are not to put your emotions on the athlete, but it is sort of a normal thing for the athlete to want to do that to you, which is you can kind of accept it in an appropriate way, but not have it become so. So if people want to do that e-learning, you can learn about that and other things. That one is very intense, I should say. There are a lot of very intense situations that they discuss, but I think it's valuable. The safe sport one is still very good, but just not not as intense with the scenarios.
Because that one is like child sexual abuse and grooming in particular.
Yeah, very
and
specific.
grooming is the one that's quite serious because it manifests in like on social media at times, and it also is that building of trust with the parents and the child, and there's an actual process that the predator goes through. So it is something that is tricky to prevent. Like that's why the rule of two would be so important to be a preventative method for grooming.
Yeah, exactly. So okay, so we're at 5, and we really want to respect people's time. So we're going to end it there. But I want to thank you so much. I think that we really got to have a good conversation and kind of go deep on certain questions that I know that people have, because people ask me these questions, and so I think that we did get some good answers. But I also think that what you expressed is that there are no necessarily like final answers on this. It's very much a discussion that as an NSO, like we're leading this discussion, we're having it now, and we're sharing it, and the PSOs and the clubs should discuss it as well. And the idea is to make people aware of responsible coaching movement and the rule of two, and to, like you said, normalize these good behaviors, and make sure that so that coaches and athletes can feel comfortable in their sports setting, because the sports setting is so important. It's a really important thing for a lot of people, and I mean we've seen that when in the last few months where people have not been able to do their sport and be with the people in their sport, and that's been one of the real emotional challenges of this time, not to speak of the sort of financial and health challenges that we're also facing. So it's a really important topic. Thank you so much for coming, and to the people who are out there listening, thank you as well. We will collect all the resources. They will be either on the recording, will be on our website, and we will also follow up with an email to send in attachment certain things that we have here, like Isabelle's presentation and the graphic and stuff like that. So, okay, thank you very much, and have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Athletics, for hosting. And my contact information is there if anybody wants to reach out as well. So thank you.
Okay, thanks.